presumptuous, but I wonder... All right, so when you come into this class, English class, what are you expecting to learn?
English.
Meaning what?
Grammar.
So maybe you're expecting to learn grammar. And by the way, I mean this is a real question. When you come in, like, what is it that you're expecting to study in this class before knowing the class or knowing me? What's that? So grammar, maybe.
Literature skills.
What's that?
Literature skills.
What are those? Because you don't know what you don't know. That's what I want to find out what they were and then learn what they are. Grammar, just a vocabulary. What's that?
Reading and writing.
Maybe how to read. Better reading skills, so maybe some reading skills. Maybe learning how to write. Okay. What's that?
Writing essays.
So if I say essays, that will include the structures and formats about how to do that. Now you've been in here for, I guess I don't remember, 4 months. Is that 4 months? Why does it feel like so much longer than that? My gosh. All right, so you've been in here for 4 months. What are you learning? Stupid question. What do you think others are learning?
Psychology.
Sure. We're learning some psychology.
Wait, English. Stoicism.
Stoicism. What's that? The what fear?
The importance.
Oh, the importance of fear. Oh, shit. So I'm laughing at this because I'm thinking like, I came in expecting to learn grammar, vocabulary, reading, writing, and essays, but what did I learn? I learned the importance of fear. That's what we learned in that class. I suppose there are worse things we could have learned. And if I want to drill the point home, I can ask you, what aspects of these things that you've learned? I wonder if they coincide at all with any of this. In other words, this is what you expected to learn, or what you could have reasonably expected to learn. And I wonder about that. Do you ever go into a class thinking, I expect to learn X, Y, and Z? Or do you just kind of show up and go, what are we doing today? You know, then we treat it like it's mechanical. Like, oh, we're going to, like we're going to do this, or we're going to do that, versus we're going to learn about this, or we're going to learn that. I don't know. And so I wonder then, if this is the thing that you expected to learn, I wonder how many of you, I won't ask the question, but I'll let you ask yourself the question. I wonder how many of us therefore look at this as a waste of time. In other words, I expected to learn this, but instead I learned this, so therefore it's a waste. I don't know. I do know that if you are doing these things here, you are by proxy, you're going to learn those things over there. Because the more that you read, the better your vocabulary is going to be, because you pick up words. The better that your grammar is going to be by osmosis, meaning that if you're actually reading sentences, you're subconsciously learning how to form sentences. This is why you take a kid, it's like a little one, like newborns, and then you talk to them a lot, and a lot, and a lot, and a lot, with regular language. Like any of you guys have little nieces, nephews, brothers, sisters, cousins, don't talk to them like they're idiots, or else they will be. In other words, if you're down there like, oh my God, all that, stupid talk, what happens is they know that they're receiving language. Or, I'm sorry, their brain knows that they're receiving language. And then they're decoding that. So that becomes their language. It's just like if you have a little kid and they mispronounce a word. Like I was describing, one of my former students came to visit me a couple days ago, and I described her, she's whittle. She's like this big, she is whittle. She's not even little, she's whittle. So if you have a kid, like a little kid, rather than saying little, says, oh, it's whittle. And you're like, oh, that's so cute. So now you always use the word whittle. They've now learned that whittle is the proper word. And then when you try to teach them little, now they've got these two competing words, whittle and little. And eventually, they will replace whittle with little. But that's a lot of wasted time. And then think about how many words are like that. All the studies that we have in the area show that when you talk to little kids as though they're normal people, they develop language skills way before everybody else. They perform much better in terms of their grammar, vocabulary. But when you talk to them like they're little kids, their development is stunted, and it takes them longer to catch up. In fact, most don't, if we're being honest. It also has to do with the number of words that you hear when you're a little kid. If you have a little kid around, you should talk to them a lot. It might be annoying, but you got to talk to them a lot. They have to hear a lot of words. And we actually have studies of how many words kids will hear and their development accordingly, especially variety of words. So my point is just that if you read these things, then you're going to develop this and this by nature of doing this. Now these, writing and essays, those are very different skill sets. Writing your thoughts is very different from speaking them. Ish. Not really. Just take out the wells and the ums, and you should be able to transcribe these things pretty well. But here's the thing. When you learn how to speak, where did you learn how to speak? Parents, right? People around you. And so you get very good at it, and then those are your models. Now, for essays and writing, you don't have informal models like that. Almost every model you probably have is a formal model, meaning it comes from a book. And so it's easy to imitate these sounds from people we hear because they're informal. It becomes very difficult to imitate this because it's a mechanical skill. That's why so many of us have trouble writing. That's why these journal things are so important to developing your writing. Because when you write your first draft of something, it should just kind of flow out conversationally. And then like you're writing an essay for school, then you should go back and revise it, and revise it, and revise it. I was just thinking, I was revising something today that, God, I wrote it 3 or 4 years ago, and I go back once in a while and revise it. I was just finishing up some revisions on it today. I wrote something over summer that I'm on my 6th revision of it. If something matters to you, you go back and you revise it, you revise it, you revise it. Don't you wish you could do that with your language, by the way? God, I wish I didn't say that. I'm going to go back and change what I said, go back in time. That's the cool thing about writing, is it forces you to slow down so that you can revise it. Anyway, my point of it is that if you're doing this, then you're going to pick this up. And so, you know, I wouldn't, obviously I don't think it's a waste of time, otherwise I wouldn't be teaching it to you. My thing is like, we're going to learn this, if we learn this stuff over here, we're going to learn this stuff by proxy. So we can double up on it. We can learn this stuff, which you wouldn't normally get. You can learn this stuff and then learn this stuff, which you wouldn't normally get. And then you can develop these skills while you're learning something that you wouldn't normally get. It's just like Dostoevsky. How many of you have heard of Dostoevsky before? Exactly. Now, next year, if you go to one of your teachers and you make a reference and you say, well, it's like Dostoevsky has said, your teacher very well might go, who? And then you'll say, Fyodor Dostoevsky. Oh, yeah. And your teacher maybe has never read them before, but your teacher will have heard of them. He's incredibly famous. He's probably the greatest novelist to ever live. If you're interested in psychology and in literature, this is the guy you want to read. He writes these fantastic, what would you call them? I mean, they're novels, but they're these fantastic character sketches. All of his bad guys, he makes a bad guy so that it's hard to hate them, but it makes sense to. In other words, you can look at a person who does evil things and say, I completely understand why this person does it, but they're still evil and need to be stopped. You can hold those two things at the same time. You don't have to have tremendous sympathy for somebody you don't have to have tremendous sympathy for a person just because you understand where they're coming from. Dostoevsky makes very strong villains. You know, they're steel man. He doesn't just make someone who's like all evil. You know, he makes them so that there's this mixture. And his good guys, his positive characters, it's the same way. He has this great, I guess, part of a story. It's called the Grand Inquisitor, where he writes essentially that it's a member of the Catholic Church, and Jesus comes back to earth, and the Catholic Church arrests him. And the reason being is that because if Jesus comes back, they're no longer necessary. But when he has a dialogue where he interviews Jesus, And the guy's explaining why it is that he has to be arrested. It's like, we understand that this, we were established here for you, but if you show up, you're going to mess everything up. And he goes on to explain what it is that the Catholic Church is doing. And at the end of it all, you can sit there and go, yeah, I can see why they'd arrest Jesus, even in that day. And you don't look at the person necessarily, like, you realize that what they're doing is wrong, but you look at them and go, they've got good motivations, though. And not just like, oh, we feel good for them. No, like, they make sense and they're strong. In other words, he makes a really strong case for his bad guys. And so what's the purpose there? Well, you're learning something about human nature. You think about some of the movies and TV shows and things that you're familiar with. The bad guys are usually just like all bad. There isn't like a lot of good in them. Or when there is the good, it's always like a sympathetic good. Like, they'll have a flashback to like his father was ignoring him and when he's a little kid, and then they flash back to him and he's like, launch the attack, And it's like just this swaying back and forth. But I wonder, if I asked you how many of you have evil in you, I hope all of your hands go up. That means that you know yourself well enough. And if I ask you how many of you have good in you, I hope all of your hands will go up because you recognize that that's what it is. It's this constant battle. Which do you end up as, good or evil? But it depends on which side wins. Which side do you have more will for? Do you have more will to do the good or to do the evil? Because one thing I can promise you is that the good that you wish to do in life, oftentimes you will not do. And the evil that you really, really don't want to do, that will be the thing that you'll end up doing. So you have to be very careful when you say things like, I would never, fill in the blank. Whatever you would say you would never do, get ready. Because you're about to do it. Because that's the thing that you think that either you're overcompensating for by saying that, because now you want to try to convince yourself or maybe even others that you would never do that thing, or you really do believe you would never do it. But that means that that's your weakness. That's the thing that you therefore aren't guarding against. You're guarding against something else, some other character flaw. And then that's when the enemy will come into that back door and attack on that side. Do you guys know about my birthday?
Yeah.
Which one?
Exactly. She knows about it. So she helps. Some students went to her and were like, you knew Scanlon last year, right? She said, yeah. I thought, what's his birthday? So she set him up with a birthday, and I got some cake 3 weeks ago. We'll fast forward over that part in case anybody watches the video. Anyway, so Dostoevsky's bad guys, they're steel man. His good guys are also steel man. In other words, his characters are all very strong. They have very human motivations. Very human motivations. One of his most famous novellas is a book called Notes from Underground. And he writes about a guy who's just a civil servant, like a DMV worker kind of guy. And it's just like basically this guy talking to himself for a couple chapters. And you're finding out how dark this character is. But you're finding out what motivates him. Why he talks about how he realizes that he has a very limited amount of power. But with that very limited amount of power he has, he can make people's lives miserable. He can reject their forms and say, you forgot to sign this one box, or you forgot to put the dot on top of the I on this box. You have to go back and read through the whole thing again. He very well could just go and then push it through, but this is a person who he just decides, he says, he's angry, he hates his life, and so therefore he wants to make life miserable for some people. And then sometimes he'll let something go through, and then not because he cares about the person, but because he wants to kind of like reassert that he has the ability to decide who gets their stuff accepted or not. It doesn't sound like an interesting premise, but it's an absolutely fascinating book. And so anyway, these are his characters. What I was saying was that if you're interested in psychology and literature, he's a great guy to read because he's the only, I'm going to say, I think he's, I don't know how I'd say it. You'll learn as much about psychology as you will about literature if you read him. Interestingly too, application-wise. So he says mankind is a mystery, so humans are a mystery. And he says it needs to be unraveled. Instead, what caught me with this sentence is that part right there. It needs to be unraveled. Not just like, I'd like to find out. I'm curious. He says it needs to be unraveled. We have to figure this out. And so if you spend your whole life unraveling it, don't say that you've wasted your time. Even if you get to the end of your life and you don't become famous or rich, or if you've discovered some things about mankind, and if you've unraveled some things about us, and yes, especially about yourself, but you can't understand yourself if you don't understand humanity. And by the way, you can't really understand humanity unless you understand yourself as well. because they're all intricately connected. So if you get to the end of your life and you've discovered some things about yourself, and by the way, every time you discover something about yourself, it's a really good idea to say, I've discovered this thing about myself. Now, what have I now discovered about humanity generally? I've discovered some things about humanity. What does that tell me about myself? Because it does, it's reciprocal. And he says he's studying that mystery because he wants to be a human being. That's the best way to become a human being, is to understand your place in all of this. And that's for him what it is to be. If I ask you what is it to be a human being, you can't know unless you really think about it. And it seems like a silly question, and it kind of is. How do you be a human being? I just exist, I just have DNA? Okay. Then figuring out from there forward, what is it to be the best version of this thing? Like if I were to ask you, okay, so if I were to ask you, this is a real question too, by the way. I just had a thought. What is it to be a good? What is it to be a good teacher? Or forget that. What is it to be a teacher? Help. Because they're going to ask me in a meeting in 2 hours. I have to have an answer. Knowledge. So I have to have knowledge. All right. Yeah, I got that. Check.
You're pretty well tempered.
To be what?
Of temper.
God damn it. All right. All right, but I got knowledge. And to be a good speller.
I came with bad news. The chicken Alfredo finished. You can bring your tacos de mole if you want some. Yeah. We went back and there was no more. Ay, Kale, no juegues.
Stop! I have fallen off of the camera.
Mole.
They would have liked it. If they liked it, they would have.
Tacos de mole?
Tacos de mole.
Yeah.
How many?
12.
2.
Man.
I'm not a greedy man. I'm not a greedy man. I'm so glad I wouldn't load the camera on that. That would have been a terrible temper tantrum to have on camera. I congratulate all of you for not.
I'll be back, Kale.
Well, I thank you. What were you saying? Well-tempered?
Yeah, well,
Okay. Immature? Okay. Well-tempered? Yeah.
Like social skills, being able to talk.
Okay. So positive social skills? Skills.
Patience.
Patience. That's one thing I have. Patience. Yes, I suppose skills with a Z now. Anything else? Teaching skills.
Teaching skills.
I have knowledge.
Respectful.
What the fuck does that mean?
Bad.
More skills, respectful. That's actually something I think is really important. I think that's really important. Even if I don't do it, it still is really important. Alright. So you get the idea. Now, if we made this list, and if I didn't put you on the spot and go, quick, now, answer this question, you'd probably come up with more stuff, I imagine. Right? That's me being respectful of your knowledge. Okay. So now, let's say that I've discovered that this is what it is for a teacher to be a teacher. And you can do this, by the way, with any category of things. What is it for a dog to be a dog? What is it for a pig to be a pig? Did I tell you I got to play with a pig? No. Oh, I'll tell you about it. Don't let me forget. I got a great pig story. I fed a pig. I fed a. Relax down. I know it's exciting, but you gotta chill. I fed a pig Doritos while she was wearing a tutu. True story. I'll tell you about it in a minute. Anyway, now if I've discovered what it is for a pig to be a pig, for a dog to be a dog, for a teacher to be a teacher, for a police officer to be a police officer, and so forth, now I can say, all right, so I want to be the best version of this. I have to do all of this to the maximum. And by the way, I can also say, it's not really part of being a teacher, but maybe, I don't know. What's something that maybe isn't part of being a teacher, but it's helpful if a teacher does it? Or a character trait that a teacher would have?
Being funny.
Being funny. Okay, so maybe being fun or funny. All right. We'll put funny, because I'm not fun, but I can make you laugh just by sitting down on the ground, apparently. That's all I had to do. So now I can sit there and go, okay, now this is what I must be in order to be a good teacher. But this would be helpful if I can learn how to be this also. So now I can start to maximize what it is to be a teacher. Make sense? So if you can discover what it is to be a human being, now you can maximize what that is. And by the way, not just a human being. If you can discover what it is to be a good person, then you can do that. If you can discover what it is to be a bad person, you can recognize it in others. And then you can recognize those things inside of yourself. If you can now narrow it down from just humanity, what is it for me to be the best version of me? And I don't mean that in some like hippy-dippy way of like, how do I become the best version of me? That's usually a cop-out for actually developing oneself. Oftentimes we'll just say, well, that's just the best version of me, or I can be the best version of me. Don't be yourself. Don't be yourself. Because we all know that we all have room to grow, that we all have ways that we can get better. And if we just kind of accept ourselves as, that's just who I am, is it who you want to be? And if your answer to that question is always yes, 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 it's exactly who I want to be, then you're going to miss opportunities to grow. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging it. You don't want to beat yourself up about it. You don't want to walk around thinking that you're a piece of crap. You want to, most of you, but you want to walk around thinking that I can be better than I am, because that gives you hope. It's like the basis of optimism. The basis of optimism is not necessarily, I think things are going to get better. That's not necessarily. It could also just be, I think there's opportunity for it to get better. You know? Have any of you guys ever heard of Billy the Kid before? Billy the Kid?
No.
Billy the Kid's a very famous outlaw. The legend goes that he killed 21 people by the time he was 21 years old. Now, of the people he killed, all right, I'm just going to say it wasn't his fault. Hear me out. It wasn't his fault. Okay, so 21, 5, whatever, you know. Who here hasn't killed 21 people? There should be a lot more hands up than that. Now, so for example, long story short, there's a guy in the 1950s who comes out, late 40s, early 50s, who says Billy the Kid was not killed. The story goes that Billy the Kid was shot and killed by a sheriff, Pat Garrett, at Fort Sumner, New Mexico. Billy the Kid claims, this guy comes along and says, I am Billy the Kid. The guy who they shot was not Billy the Kid. It was somebody else, and he has an explanation for it. And they interviewed this guy, his name is Brushy Bill Roberts, and Brushy Bill has all of the scars that Billy the Kid is said to have had. But this guy's now in his late 60s. And essentially, he was promised a pardon by the governor of New Mexico. That's why he was in custody in the first place when he shot the sheriffs, because the governor promised him a pardon if he testified against some people. So he testified, and the governor said, forget it, we're going to hang you anyway. So that's why he killed the sheriffs to get away, because they reneged on a deal that they had with him. So anyway, this guy claims to be Billy the Kid. He has all the scars that that Billy the Kid was said to have had. He explains, and he has these details, like during that escape I just told you about, he explains that he fired one shot at the sheriff and he missed because they were fighting. And the jail where he was still stands today. He went to the jail, and he's looking around, and he points out, goes, up there. And he points to a hole in the ceiling that had never been noticed before. And he's pointing out, says, yeah, and then they dug it out. Sure enough, there's a bullet in there. So he had details like that nobody else should have ever known about Billy the Kid. So anyway, it's controversial whether or not he was Billy the Kid, but I believe that Brushy Bill was Billy the Kid. So far, so good? Why do I believe he was Billy the Kid? One reason, evidence, blah, blah, blah. But there's another reason I believe he is. I really, really want to believe that he is. Because wouldn't it be awesome if, like, there's this formal story. Billy Kidd was killed in Fort Sumner, New Mexico, 1881 by Pat Garrett. But wouldn't it be so much more interesting if it turns out, no, Pat Garrett did not kill him. He escaped. And he dies in New Mexico in 1954 or whatever it was. Because that tells us something important. There was a fact, but there was something else that was out there to be discovered. Don't you like the idea that there's a whole world out there of stuff to discover? And that's the thing, I look at that, I'm like, wouldn't that be awesome? Because that would mean, I think about all the other things that you could get out there and discover. If you guys remember, like a month or two ago, there was a band I mentioned to you several times called Avatar. I like Avatar a lot. And why do I like them so much? I like their music, but also, it's fantastic when you discover something new like that. Like some new piece of music or some new band that, I hate to say it, but I'll sound like old man Scallon for a minute. When I'm 41 years old. So at 41 years old, all of a sudden I discovered this new band. It isn't like I'm 15, like almost every piece of music in the world is new to me. I've been around for a little bit, and so all of a sudden you discover something new, you're like, you know what that means? That means there's more out there to discover. That makes the world more interesting. It makes the world fascinating. And it revives your interest in things. Does this make sense? That's what he's unraveling. He's studying the mystery because he wants to be a human being. There are things about yourself that you search, and you discover something new. It's like, that's so awesome. That means that there's a lot more about myself I can discover. There's a lot more about the world I can discover. There's a lot more about whatever subject, Billy the Kid, or music, or whatever it is. There's a whole world, there's a whole universe of stuff out there that has to be discovered. And that's what makes it so exciting. And sometimes that's what makes life... Man, that's not to make a point, too. My point is...
Those tacos,
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I appreciate that. You're a real one. Thank you.
I'm boarding my class, Carmen.
What's that?
I'm boarding my class. Probably coming now.
So were they.
I can tell.
Yeah, they're having to hear about outlaws and...
Oh, no,
What is it? History? World history?
No.
I love that. No, it's English.
It's math.
Wow, we're not doing
But you can be forgiven for thinking it's a history class or a psychology class or a philosophy class or just
English what?
10. ELA 10.
Oh,
I have to look at
you
you
don't
guys.
even know what the
Look like... to have 12th grade also.
Yeah.
I forgot my point. No, my point was that is what makes life... This is what makes life so... My point is, this is what makes life so fascinating sometimes, when you realize that there's so much more out there to discover. It isn't just the things that are in front of you, but there's a whole universe. Whatever, you get the point. Question, comments, critiques? Neat. Go ahead and put those away. Unless I owe you...